This next portion of chapter 2 is going to focus on the brain, and one of the first questions that we can ask is how do researchers have learned about the functions of the brain? And um, these findings about the brain occur in a number of different ways. And first, of course, we can gather information from experimenting with the brain, like for example assessing damage for trauma and disease. If an individual have received the trauma to the head in a particular region and all of a sudden they become unable to perform a particular function, then we will be able to link that particular area of the brain that has been damaged with the inability that resulted in the functioning of that individual. Sometimes doctors will intentionally damage parts of the brain, certainly not to hurt individuals, but to make them feel better. Like for example, in removing a tumor, a neurosurgeon will intentionally remove a portion of the brain, and if by again removing that portion of the brain that individual suffers from a particular disorder, that particular disorder or inability can be linked to the area of the brain that has been removed. The brain can also be stimulated using electrical probes. As you remember, the action potential, which is the activity of neurons in the brain, is an electrochemical process, so that whenever an electrical probe is releasing a strong enough amount of electrical potential, that electrical potential is going to stimulate neurons in that particular area of the brain, so that a connection can be made between the activity of those neurons, whatever it is that the individual might feel, might experience in terms of movement perhaps, and the area of the brain that has been stimulated. We can use electroencephalograms, which is a measurement of electrical activity that results in brain waves. This is typically used in sleep studies. Other brain imaging techniques that are relatively recent in history has been the CAT scan or CT scan, which results in a three-dimensional image of the brain, and is especially useful to individuate areas, particular areas, the size, particular areas of the brain. PET scan and fMRI are both useful in terms of relating structures to function, because both in this PET scan as well as in functional MRI we can make a connection between the activity of the brain and the function of that particular individual, whatever it is that they are doing. On the other hand, regular MRI can be used to evaluate the structures in the brain in terms of size, in terms of location of these structures in the brain. Whenever we look at the brain, we can begin at the lowest possible point, which is the connection between the brain and the spinal cord, and that particular area is called the hindbrain, which means below the brain or behind the brain. And the first area is the medulla. Above it is the pons, then comes the cerebellum. All of these structures are connected to some very basic functions, like for example the medulla is responsible for the heartbeat and respiration of individuals. So it is obvious that if someone damages the medulla, that individual can suffer from very dramatic consequences. Above the hindbrain comes the midbrain, and the largest portion of the midbrain is the reticular activation system, responsible for attention, sleep, and arousal. Then comes the forebrain, that includes the thalamus, which is a relay station for sensory stimulation coming into the brain from the periphery of our body. The hypothalamus, which regulates body temperatures, motivation, and emotion. Hunger, thirst, for example, sexual behavior, caring for offspring, and aggression are all functions mediated by the hypothalamus. As we will see later, the hypothalamus is also responsible for the functioning of the hormonal system in our body. There is also the limbic system in the forebrain, composed of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and parts of the hypothalamus. Involved is memory formation as well as emotional reaction. You can actually look in your textbook to identify these particular areas within the brain. Now, above the forebrain comes the cerebrum, which is responsible for higher order processing such as thinking and language, as well as motor movement and processing of sensory information. The very important region in the cerebrum is the cerebral cortex, which is the outer surface of the cerebrum, the skin of the cerebrum, if you will. Now, as we will see, hemispheres of the brain are independent from each other. We have two, of course. We have a left and right hemisphere, and these two hemispheres are connected underneath by the corpus callosum, this structure mostly composed of axons that connect the left and right hemisphere, so that our left and right hemisphere can communicate with each other, so that the right hemisphere knows what the left hemisphere is doing and vice versa. So we have two hemispheres, and within each hemisphere we have four lobes. We have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. And you can see some of the primary functions of these different lobes. The occipital lobe, located right in the back, as you'll see in a moment, of our cortex, is responsible for vision. The temporal lobe, located approximately below our ears, responsible for processing hearing and auditory function. The parietal lobe, located approximately, right over the temporal lobe, responsible for somatosensory processing, meaning sensory information coming in from the skin of our body. So whenever someone is touching, for example, something with their hand, that particular information goes to the somatosensory cortex. And the frontal lobe, in the front of the cortex, contains the motor region, where we process the ability to move our body. All right? And you see here the frontal region, the central fissure, which is a dividing point between the frontal region and the parietal region. The parietal lobe, which processes skin sensation. The occipital region, this is for visual. And the temporal lobe, which is primarily responsible for processing sound. Now, these particular these images are called the homunculus. Homunculus literally means little man, and as you can see, different regions of the body are represented in our brain. So this is the cortex, the primary motor cortex here on the left, and different regions of the body are represented, as I was saying, so that if someone let's say was to stimulate this particular region, what would happen is that the tongue would move. If I was to stimulate this region of this individual, the thumb would move, and so forth. Now, right behind the primary motor cortex is the somatosensory cortex. Again, similar representation, but in this case we are processing sensory information. So if I were to stimulate this area of the brain in this individual with microelectrodes, this individual will experience sensation coming in from the thumb, which again, as we will see later when we talk about sensation and perception, can be different things. Can be pressure, can be pain, can be heat or cold. Now, some individuals are thought to be using more of their left brain, while other individuals are using more of their right brain. Left brain is more logical and intellectual, while the right brain is more intuitive, creative, it's more emotional. And in general, hemispheres do not act independently because, as you remember, they are connected underneath via the corpus callosum. You can see here a representation of the primary function performed by the left hemisphere versus the right, just to appreciate the qualitative difference between these two hemispheres. Again, normally the corpus callosum, as you can see here, connects the two hemispheres, but in general, whenever, for example, you're performing mathematical operation, your left hemisphere is more active. Language also are performed in the left hemisphere. Science, writing, logic. On the other hand, in the right hemisphere you have music appreciation, art, dance, fantasy. So in general the left hemisphere is more concrete, while the right hemisphere is more abstract. In addition to that, there's a connection between the two hemispheres in our body. The left hemisphere controls and processes information coming in from the right side of our body. On the other hand, the right hemisphere connects down on the opposite side in a particular connection called the contralateral connection. It goes down to the left, right? So left brain goes down to the right, right brain goes down to the left. Generally speaking, as you all know, most people are right-handed, and if you ask why are most people right-handed, well, we can go back to this representation. Now, what is it that we are writing? Of course, we are writing language. We are writing language-related information. You can ask yourself, where are the centers for language? They're in the left hemisphere, right? So if the language centers are in the left and we are writing language, where do we directly connect that region of the brain to our body? And the left hemisphere, as I mentioned before, connects to the right hand, right? So if you're processing language-related information in this part of the brain, it would make sense that we would send them out, or at least we'll be more likely to send them out to the right side of our body. Sometimes, because of some condition like epilepsy, individual corpus callosum is cut so that the two hemispheres do not directly connect anymore. And what we will be able to observe is this differentiation between left hemisphere and right hemisphere, this what is called hemispheric specialization, so that if an individual's corpus callosum has been cut and someone is touching an object that they cannot see with their left hand, they will not be able to say what it is, right? Because their language centers are located in the opposite hemisphere, right? So they will have that information on the right, but they will not be able to process it properly because the language centers are in the left. Now, our body can communicate in two ways. One is via the nervous system, which we have just covered, using neurons, using the particular regions of the brain. Then we have another way that our body can communicate, and that is by using hormones, and that is called the endocrine system. The endocrine system is comprised of glands that release these hormones into the bloodstream. These hormones regulate growth, metabolism, some behavior like aggression, for example, sexual behavior, and they also involve this endocrine system in maintaining a steady bodily states, which is called homeostatic regulation. So we want to maintain, for example, say the proper amount of temperature within the body, right? So if we go too much above it, actually just a few degrees above the normal temperature, we will experience a fever. If our internal body temperature goes just a few degrees below what it is supposed to be, we can experience hypothermia. So it's very important that we maintain these steady bodily states, not only in terms of temperature, but also water intake, glucose level in our bloodstream, and so forth. And you see here depicted the most important components of the endocrine system. We have the hypothalamus, which is that region in the forebrain that we have discussed before. The hypothalamus directly controls the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system. So the pituitary controls all the other glands, including the thyroid, the adrenal gland, the pancreas, the kidneys, the ovaries, and the uterus. Of course, testes in males, and the ovaries and uterus would be in females. So the pituitary controls all the other glands, but the hypothalamus directly controls the pituitary. These hormones, some hormones, or sometimes called factors, are secreted by the pituitary. They travel in the bloodstream and they affect the functioning of other glands. An example of another gland is the pineal gland, which is located below our eyes, and it secretes a hormone called melatonin. As you know, melatonin helps regulate the sleep-wake cycle whenever melatonin is released, due to the fact that our eyes pick up that there is no light out there. So whenever there is darkness in our environment, the pineal gland releases melatonin, which makes us feel tired, and we are more likely to fall asleep. Thyroid is involved in body metabolism, the level at which we are processing food. The adrenal glands, again, related to the fight or flight mechanism that we have discussed previously. It releases corticosteroids, which increase resistance to stress, promote muscle development, stimulates the body, right, the epinephrine and norepinephrine. We have then testosterone, produced by testes, which whenever it's released then leads to the production of the secondary male sexual characteristics, such as facial hair, for example, and estrogen and progesterone produced by ovaries, which leads to the development in the body of female sexual characteristics, for example, development of breasts.